And so today, our day is for this report launch. And the main people here, our stars for today are Jessina, Nieminen.
Hi.
Yes, and Jessina is a consultant and author of this report. And Jessina is an expert in international affairs and sustainable development. And also she is finalizing her master's degree at Aalto University. And she will introduce herself more when she starts with her presentation. And she will give us a brief of the summary then of this whole report. And then our next star for today is Faraja Nyalando. And Faraja is the founder and executive director of Shule Direct. Shule Direct is a platform for an EdTech platform in Tanzania. So she's the CEO of that, and she's a social entrepreneur. And above all, Faraja has been recognized this year by World Economic Forum as a young global leader in the class of 2020. Yes, so before we start with the first presentation, I would like to remind everyone, please, to keep yourself muted. And then if you have any technical problems, please contact Mika in the chat. And then feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you feel like, putting your name and organization. And other than that, all the questions that you might have, please just type them in the chat. They will be collected and they will all be read out loud and answered during the Q&A. Okay, so welcome, Jessina, and we can start.
Okay, thank you, Emma, and good afternoon. And also thank you on my behalf for participating, and thank you for your interest towards this important topic. So I'm very happy to see so many of us here today who have come to hear and discuss this topic of digital education in Tanzania. So I am Jessina Nieminen, the author of the Fingo Powerbank report published in June 2020 called The Landscape Report on Digital Education in Tanzania. And I recommend everyone reading it after this launch event, as in this launch event, I will be giving the summary of the report. And I will be telling about the findings that were discovered from the landscape analysis from various website sources, as well as from the interviews that I conducted with local digital education organization representatives. But at this point, let me share you the screen so you will see the slides. Okay, do you see the slides now? Yes, good. And well, I hope we will have an interesting event and a nice discussion here today, and I hope the connection is good and that you will be able to hear me well as well. So then a bit about the author, so me. A small introduction. So I'm a Bachelor of Science in International Business, and I'm also soon to be Master of Science in Economics and Business Administration from Aalto University in Finland, which is actually also my home country. I've also studied and worked in many regions outside my home country, including Hong Kong, the US, and Switzerland, among others, which is how I've gotten experience and insight about many regions and countries. I'm interested in learning things from a global aspect, and I find the international experience very useful in this. So in Aalto University, my master's study major is management and international business, and the specialization is in sustainability, which is why I find the Master of Science studies that they have been of great support for my work in international affairs, public affairs, and sustainable development in recent years. And previously, I have worked with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and currently I'm working as the consultant for the Powerbank program with Fingo. And this Powerbank program with Fingo and preparing for this launch event has been very interesting. So I am very happy to be speaking here today to you about this topic. And I'm happy that we'll get to discuss. So please feel free to present your questions about this report and the presentation at the Q&A session today at the launch event. So let's then move on to the actual presentation. And let's start this presentation by talking about the key stakeholders. So the key stakeholders in the Tanzania digital education ecosystem include the government, which, for example, sets education policies. And then we have the private sector, which is, for example, businesses and startups. And then there is civil society, where, for example, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are part of. And the stakeholders include also, for example, educational institutions, the public government schools and private schools, as well as, for example, universities, local and international financiers and organizations, and entrepreneurs and social enterprises. And all these stakeholders do work together in many different areas. For example, the government and telecommunication companies have worked towards finding ways to bring digital devices and digital opportunities more broadly to students to access with, for example, the African Digital Schools Initiative program. Then also, for example, telecommunication companies have launched SMS study platforms for students to use in collaboration with NGOs, who then again create the learning content. So there is a lot of collaboration going on with that, with these stakeholders. Then I would like to talk about the timeline of some recent development of digital education in Tanzania. So I have picked here a few points to talk about. So there has been a development with digital or ICT policies and programs during the past decades. So there's actually been improvement with education accessibility also recently. In 2016, the policy of fee-free basic education came into use in Tanzania. And the policy aims at making sure Tanzanian children would have the possibility to get basic education. Then also, Tanzania has developed an information and communication technology policy for basic education. And already in 2003, the ICT policy addressed the need of improvements with ICT skills and the need to address the digital divide that there is, especially between rural and the urban areas. The policy also called for integrating technology in preschool, primary, and secondary education. Then other examples of initiatives for digital literacy and enhancing accessibility of school is the African Digital Schools Initiative program that was launched in Tanzania in 2017. Which is a program that focused on 40 secondary schools in 2 regions. Then there's also the Tanzania Secondary Education Quality Improvement Program that aims to provide more accessible secondary education to children in Tanzania. And the project also is specifically aiming to help decrease school dropouts in the secondary education phase, which is especially critical for girls. I would like to speak a bit more about this 5-year education sector plan and the fee-free basic education policy and education structure. So Tanzania aspires to provide free basic education for all students in Tanzania, from pre-primary education to a lower secondary education. So the basic education is aspired to start from already at pre-primary school level, and then to continue to primary school in forms 1 to 7 and lower secondary education for forms 1 to 4. And well, you can see the slides here, and here we have from pre-primary school to lower secondary school education, and this is the basic education. And after these forms, then, well, after this basic education phase, students have a possibility to continue to advanced level secondary education, and then to vocational or university studies. And well, the impacts of the fee-free basic education policy, so for pre-primary to lower secondary education, can be seen in the increased enrollment in basic education and the decreased number of out-of-school children. So, for example, enrollment in Tanzanian primary education has risen by 17%, and in the secondary education, it rose by 23% over 4 years in 2015 to 2018, which is good improvement. And moreover, student retention has also increased, as well as then gender gap has also narrowed somewhat in primary school and lower secondary education as impact of this fee-free education policy. And then, well, to be able to understand the digital education development and the landscape better, here you can see the landscape and context analysis, considering socio-cultural, technology and environment, political and economic, and the legal landscape. So Tanzania is one of the most populous East African countries, with estimate of 58.55 million people in 2020. So almost 1/3 of the population is urban, meaning that 2/3 live in rural areas where there are fewer possibilities for education compared to urban areas. Then the Tanzanian population is also very youthful. So about 2/3 of the population is under 25 years old and is growing rapidly. So therefore, in future, digital education solutions need to be able to handle an even larger, faster growing population. And therefore, also in future, because of growing population, there could be more challenges regarding resources and quality of education. It was estimated in 2019 that there was a shortage of 80,000 teachers in Tanzanian government and public schools. And overall, there are extreme disparities between the resources available for private and public schools. And therefore, well, it is a challenge to increase school access at the same time with the aim to improve education quality and learning outcomes. But however, the World Bank has been working with the government of Tanzania on the implementation of the policy to respond to the entry of a vast number of new students in primary and secondary school. Then, however, challenging is also that in 2016, the poverty rate was estimated to be 26.8%, which, however, had reduced during the previous decade. So there was improvement, but still, however, because of the fast population growth, the number of people in poverty stays in about 13 million. And even though overall enrollment in schools has improved, there are still severe gaps between poor and non-poor children, especially comparing rural and urban areas. And what's more, the World Bank has said that the economic crisis caused by the global pandemic all over the world then could push 500,000 more citizens to live under the poverty line. So therefore, distance learning possibilities are important, especially in situations like the pandemic. However, lack of access to electricity and internet connection poses challenges to distance learning. In Tanzania, it was estimated in 2017 that the population without electricity remains at 39 million people. And the electrification rate in rural areas is very much lower than compared to urban areas, which then works out totaling to only 33% of the total population of Tanzania having access to electricity. However, also, well, the usage of mobile phones is about 78 per 100 inhabitants, meaning roughly that 2/3 of citizens do have a phone. However, then, well, the internet usage by 2016 estimate was only 13% of the whole population. So internet usage was still very low. And by these estimates, it appears that the broadcast media and offline SMS learning solutions are actually the most reliable technologies for the larger number of students to access learning across Tanzania. And well, then I will talk about the education technology opportunities that there are in Tanzania with several hubs, startups, NGOs, accelerators, and events. So there are several digital learning solutions and services in Tanzania which address learning for different ages and education forms, from pre-primary through primary and secondary education to university level education. And the learning solutions do range from free of charge use to low cost or subscription based. So there are accessible options to choose from. Moreover, there are also solutions for individual students, but also solutions that are targeted to be purchased by schools. And the variety of solutions currently available aim to address the gaps and the skills and access to learning, as there are both online and offline SMS platforms available where no internet connection is needed. And then face-to-face hubs to learn hands-on skills. Then also, well, accessible platforms like broadcast media, as television or radio, ensure that no mobile phone or internet connection is needed unnecessarily if there's no access to internet. But I recommend please reading the report after this event, as there's more information there. So you will find more information about these organizations from the report then. And then there are some education technology events and hubs in Africa. And for example, some events that there are in Tanzania, these others are in East Africa or the area. But some examples in Tanzania are Tanzania Innovation Week and then Tech Fest Tanzania. Just a moment. Okay, so for this report and the study, I conducted some interviews with digital education organizations and their representatives as remote video calls. And we had discussions, and there were a few patterns that came up in the discussions, and they were, well, many of them talked about the youthful population of Tanzania that is growing fast. So they were concerned already about the gaps that there currently are in opportunities and access to resources, but many of them were concerned about the widening gap with the population growth. Then they also talked about the poverty gap there is. But many of them saw the fee-free basic education policy as a very good improvement. However, some of them mentioned that, families, students from families that are in living in poverty or in vulnerable positions, many of them cannot afford the school supplies and uniform that they have to buy themselves. So there's still issues with access for those who are in most vulnerable positions. Then they also talked about the urban and rural areas and the gap, and then also the gap between public and private education. So there is a vast digital divide and gap between skills and resources between schools in public and private education. So in public education, the teacher shortage is vast compared to the private education. And at the time of these interviews, also schools were closed because of the pandemic at the time. So the respondents also mentioned the global pandemic and said that many of them said that they were concerned because many students now had to learn remotely. And many of them said that those who study in private schools, for them, it should be easier because in education in private schools, there's often ICT technology, digital technology used in education, but because of resources in many public schools, that is not the case. But based on these discussions in the interviews, so there are some key gaps and challenges in schools and education that were identified. So based on the background research and interviews with local organizations working in the field of digital education, some gaps and challenges in delivering needed resources for digital learning could be identified. So for example, lack of available devices for online and offline environments, especially considering the rural and urban areas gap and public and private education. Then they also mentioned they thought that even though there were devices in schools, there is often a lack of basic IT skills or basic training to use the device. Some of them said that continuous IT support for using the devices is needed because they had seen that when computers did not suddenly work, it has been often the case that many computers then just stay unused. Then also lack of appropriate training of digital skills for teachers, mostly because of the shortage there is, especially in public schools. Then also it was found that it is very important to enhance skills to search for relevant learning content. So it is important that students are able to search for relevant content in the Tanzanian and East African context with the common languages and concepts used. And the respondents in interviews said that not everybody knows about the opportunities for learning that there are. So there are many gaps with this. So therefore, the following suggestions that you can see on the slides could be addressed by NGOs with the resources and knowledge about local capacity building. And the capacity building could mean, for example, raising awareness in the communities about digital tools and opportunities available for students. For example, about participation and learning opportunities with local NGOs, startups, and hubs. And how to raise this awareness? It can be raised through collaborations with various participants by organizing trainings, building connections between various relevant parties, and building relationships with important stakeholders. And these stakeholders could be, for example, local government representatives, community leaders, families, teachers, local education technology hubs, startups, and NGOs. And these collaborations could consider, for example, devices as acquiring low-cost offline devices to deliver credible content to a large number of students. Especially in rural areas, basic televisions or radios are more feasible digital learning tools, as online connection is often minor or non-existent. Then training. Well, training of basic digital skills and for use of devices in schools and communities is important. And the training should consider the relevant needs and the skill level of the individuals and the certain groups. And then about the content. Connecting schools and communities with relevant solutions available by acquiring locally relevant learning materials with relevant language and Tanzanian context is important. So the key is to raise awareness about credible and relevant learning material that students can identify with, and to support teachers and students to better use the devices that they already are in schools, as well as to then raise awareness on available opportunities for students also outside of the classroom. So thank you. This was my presentation, and I think next Emma will speak, and I will stop sharing this screen just a moment. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jessina, for your very good presentation. And I understand that there must have been a lot of challenges doing this study online without, being there in Tanzania physically. So maybe quick questions. I have two quick questions. Just the first one is like, what were the challenges, if any, of doing the study online? And do you think somehow they have affected the output?
Well, I think, challenges writing this study online without visiting Tanzania were mostly that I needed to rely on information that I found from several sources on the internet. However, I was able to then conduct interviews with local representatives of digital education organizations in Tanzania. And I think the interviews with the people from the ecosystem, I think very much helped me to then broaden my perspective of the information I had already studied, and then to be able to write a coherent report.
Right, thank you. And then the second question is that when it comes to this digital issue in country like Tanzania, we know that, yes, the penetration of technology is, in a good level. And then we know that there's many people now in Tanzania who have mobile phones, for example, who can access these services, for example. But let's face it, that there is still a majority of people who don't have any mobile phone or a computer for that matter, and I don't even see any chance of them owning these in the next 5 years. And even if someone comes and gives them for free, then using them is another thing, or even the parents and guardians supporting their children to be able to use them to access these contents. Educational content is a challenge. So during your study, did you see or in your opinion, do you think that the country is doing enough enough effort to make these, the educational content or digital education go all the way to those who are not yet connected at the moment? Are they trying, or you didn't?
Okay, so, well, as you said, many Tanzanians have a mobile phone. So it's roughly 2/3 that do have it, but it doesn't still mean that every family would have a mobile phone, and it doesn't mean that if the family has a mobile phone, it would be in the use of the children for the studying of the learning material. But luckily, there is TV and radio broadcasting, which deliver programs that enhance learning of students and is more accessible then. And like we discussed in this presentation, the Tanzanian government has aspired to make education and digital education more inclusive with many policies and programs, such as the free basic education policy or the African Digital Schools initiative. And well, given that there is a fast-growing young population, it is a challenge for all resources to keep up with the quality of services and bring access to school wider. So I think it is very important that there is, as there seems to be, a continuing effort to improve the situation of poor families to access at least some device and to have possibility for education.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, now we'll jump to our second speaker, who is a guest speaker from Tanzania, Faraja Nyalandu. Welcome, Faraja.
Thank you. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I am Faraja Nyalandu, the founder and current CEO of Sure Direct in Tanzania. I am a lawyer by profession. I did my Master of Law and undergrad in law, focusing on human rights, children, and women's rights. I feel strongly about education, and I'm so glad that my law background gives me the foundation to actually be able to push for education as a human right, as a children's right. And I'm particularly very fond of how best we can leverage technology to improve access to education. And through that access, we can then improve learning outcomes. We started SureDirect around mid-2013, but our full operation started in early 2014. So it's been about 6.5 years of a lot of failures, wins, and lessons. And I'm happy to share with you all that we've learned in the ecosystem based on our own experience, but also from what we've seen with other ecosystem players. So in Tanzania, what we've really seen, and again, starting from a very optimistic point of view, after going through a very dreadful season of COVID-19, I feel like it's so important to also look at what has really worked and what is currently working in our market. So as you can see, Tanzania as a country has really grown in its digital space in technology. There's a strong appetite and uptake in using technology for multiple purposes, not just education. So you find a lot of people are consuming content, are creating content. They're engaging on the internet. And so currently we have over 23 million users using internet. And again, it's for multiple users. And most of these people will access internet through mobile phones. So you find that mobile phones penetration is quite high in Tanzania. About 8 out of 10 households will have a mobile phone. That number is increasingly pushing to 9 currently. It's actually 9 in urban areas, and it's still at 8 in rural areas. And that's the most common device that people will naturally interact on for internet. And then, of course, you find that there's a lot of, the most popular platform, of course, is how most they use SMS. So you find that most people use SMS and not necessarily use other tools that are available through the mobile phones. So there's still SMS, as much as we kind of think of it as outdated, it's still a very popular platform for most people in Tanzania. And again, you'll see some slight variation between people with mobile phones and people using internet on the mobile phone. But again, it's more around we'll discuss this later, on the cost of data and also the type of phones they have. So you can find that sometimes people have mobile phones, but not necessarily have smartphones. And that makes the variation exist. Yeah, wait. Yeah, and so that is really optimistic in our case, in the sense that there's a great opportunity to leverage all these people on the technology, but also users who are already on these platforms, who are already engaging on the internet, who are already using technology. And what we'll find is that they will use technology, they will use internet, they will engage on these devices, but previously, it wasn't so much for education. It was more around for entertainment. It could be for news, for information. And increasingly, we are seeing a lot of appetite for knowledge, not necessarily mainstream, and currently also for mainstream. I think in the light of COVID-19, we saw a lot of uptake, a lot of interest in how best we can use digital platforms for learning. As soon as schools closed, there are a lot of initiatives that were backed by the government, but also the private sector and the CSO sector on how best we can actually push for digital platforms to support education. And again, it's so important because there's a number of things that have been happening in the last 5 years in Tanzania. We have a target of having gross enrollment rate for primary schools to be at 99% by 2025. It's currently at 93.2%. This is really, really good. It means we have more children getting into primary schools, being able to access education through primary schools, and more parents are actually aware of the value of education. So it is quite optimistic. And again, we find that currently the gross enrollment rate at secondary, it was significantly lower. It was half of that number. It was around 23% previously, but now it's also increasingly growing and it's currently at 43.7%. Of course, as a nation, we still have a higher target. But what you find is that with every target that we're setting for enrollment, it means we have more students getting into the schools. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same support system in place to support the growing number of students getting into those schools. So what enrollment means, on the other hand, is it also means there's a significant restraining of resources in the schools, especially around teachers. So if we have, let's say, 100 students instead of 50 students, it means we also have to increase the teachers in the schools so that we can have a better or an improved ratio of students and teachers, which is not currently the case. And it means we also have to look at things like infrastructure support, things like learning materials, learning resources, but also we also have to consider the entire administration of the school, whether it's ready to support students twice the number that they previously had. And again, of course, we still, as a country, are very optimistic in the sense that we really want to achieve a high pass rate. Currently it's at 77%, but our target is at 78%, which we're very close to achieving. And it means we will be able to have more students pass their secondary exams and proceed to higher levels of education. At the same time, this again means we really have to consider what we provide in the school setting to avoid the notion that a student is attending school but not learning. And what we really want to achieve is not just attendance, but also learning. So as much as, yes, we have students in schools, we also want them to be learning and creating the right conducive environment that can support their learning, which is not necessarily the case. And of course, there's a lot of initiatives in trying to achieve that, but it still needs considerably all of us to support. Yeah, so we have what is very interesting here is that we have standard 1 students and not necessarily getting to Form 1, so, or getting to complete their secondary education. It's a challenge because you have students getting into the school system, but not necessarily retain their admission or stay in school up until what we desire, which will be the end of their secondary education at Form 4. And currently, we have retention rate at about 48%. The national target is at 75%. And that doesn't, it is a challenge, and unfortunately it affects girls more than boys. There are a lot of issues around why girls drop out, and you find that if you dig deeper in the number, you find that it's more girls who are affected, who are not necessarily retained from when they enroll in standard 1 all the way to Form 4. They may drop at standard 7 out of failure, or they may drop at midway through secondary school, perhaps out of teen pregnancies or early marriages or other cultural and traditional aspects that require them, or perhaps also child labor, where they're required to actually take up jobs and be able to participate in the economic activities of the family. So there are a number of factors which really prevent them from completing their secondary education. But again, our target as a country is to reach 75% of that retention. And this is how we are currently learning. So our students are currently learning through what I've called chalk and talk. And again, this is just how I personally learned. I learned through a blackboard and just having a teacher at the front of the classroom and having a teacher dispense knowledge, which again is there's been a lot of debate around this approach, and also discussing the role of a teacher, whether it's enough to have a teacher just dispense knowledge and not necessarily be a facilitator of knowledge or facilitator of learning. How is a teacher positioned in a classroom to be able to assist students to learn from each other, to learn from the teacher, but also to be able to share and engage with the learning and the lessons. And then of course, we also learn through science practicals, where we would go into a science lab. If there is a lab, there's been a strong push to have more science first laboratory in the country, but it's still an ambition. We haven't achieved in its entirety to have all the labs available in all the schools. There's significant progress there, but it's not yet attained. And of course, we also learn through teacher and students engagement. And again, this is very bilateral. It's pretty much based on a teacher coming in. So it's kind of like part and parcel with the chalk and talk, a teacher coming in, explaining the concept and expecting the students to respond and give feedback to the teacher. And yeah. And so that is what has been happening. So if you look at the two aspects, we have a lot of users existing and upcoming users, and improved connectivity, improved access to devices, improved access to devices, but also improved access to different platforms. And at the same time, we have education, and we have these restrained resources in the education system, and how best can we merge the two to ensure that students can learn. And so there's several pathways through technology that can achieve learning. And so the first one is, how best can we create accessible teachers through technology, and how best can we create supplementary learning opportunities. So in the case where a student went to school and not necessarily fulfilled the learning objectives or their learning needs, they can be able to go back home and cover up or catch up with what they missed out in school. And then the other thing which is very interesting is that what technology can do, which cannot really be done in a physical setting, is that enhanced engagement with the learning resource, which is very individualized and personalized. And it was very interesting. I was part of this webinar about a month or so ago. It was from the World Innovation Summit for Education. And they were really explaining how this is a strong learning outcome for e-learning platforms, in the sense that it can allow an individual student to pace themselves, to be able to create their own tailor-made experience to enhance their learning, but also to decide on how they want to learn with their peers on the platforms, but also they have an autonomy on assessments as well, which can perhaps not be achieved in a physical setting. And then of course, so this is kind of how we can also look at merging the two based on the potential of technology, but then also how education is also positioned to leverage technology. So the first thing, of course, as what we've commonly heard, is that content is king. So having relevant educational content, and this relevant educational content can be made available on digital platforms. And these digital platforms is not necessarily just having a platform and then you have kind of like PDFs of content, but having interactive and responsive platforms that are not necessarily just providing an experience for the user, but they're also providing feedback for the user and collecting data that can be used to improve experiences, learning experiences of the future, and provide strategic direction for the e-learning experience in general. And then, of course, the other thing which is so important to consider is also digital skills and behaviors. How best are we building these skills? So apart from having relevant educational content, having robust digital platforms, is also how are we building and integrating digital skills among the users? And how are we structuring the educational content and the platforms to enable students and teachers to adopt their behaviors? So again, as with any new thing, you use it once, it's not necessarily an adoption. So kind of how do we maintain constant use of digital platforms, having a learning experience online, and how best do we have that initiation of these digital skills? And then of course, there's an issue of devices and connectivity, which again, as much as there's a lot of growth in this area, we also have to consider how do we provide devices and connectivity in schools. So what I was sharing earlier was more around the market dynamics, what we have existing in the country, and more around the community. But then how best do we support devices and connectivity in schools directly, and having them integrated within the school system, within the school schedule. And so as SureDirect, we have, we built our digital model of education based on the traditional model of education. So it's built on the aspects of what I was saying earlier, the chalk and talk, the teacher-student engagement, and all the different methodologies that we have in the existing traditional model of education. And what you can find is that there's several components. So we still need platforms of learning, which in a physical sense will be a classroom, for instance. In our case, it will be a web platform. We still need content, which in our case will be having an e-curriculum. We still need training, which in our case will be skills for the teachers to be able to use ICT, but also skills for the students to be able to have digital skills to actually engage with the platform. But it's also around advocacy. How do we bring all the different stakeholders, and how do we push for the right policies and the right curriculum development that can support ICT for education? And ultimately, we believe with those components that we'll be able to achieve learning outcomes. But what is also so important for us is the fact that we have categorized our users into caregivers. So these could be parents, could be guardians, any person who is in charge of taking care of the students or children and ensure they meet their learning needs, and also learners themselves, the students who are supposed to be learning and having access to quality education. And then of course the educators. So educators could be teachers, could be the school administration. It could be, now increasingly we have multiple people who can actually share different knowledge and learning resources, who can also be classified as educators, who are not necessarily certified teachers. And then of course we also have institutions. So institutions are very broad. Apart from just having schools, we can also look at organizations. We can also look at public sector institutions that can, again, that are part of the ecosystem. We're also looking at funders and enablers of supporting the digital model of education, but then building off from the traditional model of education. So all of these factors, having the different pillars from the platform's content, training, and advocacy, but also factoring in the different players, together we can have a very robust ecosystem that is sharing different experiences and different expertise to be able to build the right digital model of education. And again, if we look at what technology can do, so there's several things. So in some cases, technology comes in with digital education. It comes in as a substitute. It comes in places where, for instance, there's an absent teacher and the student has to learn, let's say, biology because they have to sit for that in the national exam. Then at that point, technology can come in and assist the student to be able to fill that gap of the absent teacher. But also, again, technology also augments the learning experience. And in this case, it's not necessarily coming in to replace, but it enhances the learning experience through the different features, through the different functions. And it really creates, it sparks, first of all, the student's interest to learn. And it really creates a very engaging sort of relationship with learning between the student and the platform. But then technology becomes the function in between. And then of course there's also an aspect of how best do we redesign our content and our curriculum to be able to fit the learning needs. So technology allows for this. There's this common thing that we're seeing during COVID-19 where we find that we have teachers struggling to imitate the classroom experience and try to take it online or through a media platform. You will have a teacher trying to teach a specific subject, let's say through a TV program, but then they will be trying to teach it, trying to mimic the classroom experience. But then technology allows us to redesign that experience, to think afresh, to think of how we can actually redefine new concepts, redefine even previous concepts, but then look at how best you can integrate a number of things. So there is a greater need to be able to look at how all these factors can play together. And if we consider all these aspects, we can then have improved learning outcomes. We can also increase the system's capacity. By system, for us, it's internal as an organization, but it's also the ecosystem, and it's also the education system in its entirety. But ultimately, what we've really seen as a struggle is that education, especially during COVID-19, is that education is not necessarily equitable, and it really has to factor in inclusion. I'm a big fan of the National Inclusive Strategy for Education, which calls for inclusion of students with special needs, students with learning needs, students with different kinds of disabilities, including learning disabilities. And so I really think it's a great chance for us to consider and to have all the different players come together and achieve this. I'm trying to move to the next slide. Okay. Yes, so, and again, because we have a number of NGOs engaged in education, but not necessarily in the digital education space. And as you heard from Jessina, there's quite a significant role that NGOs can play here. And I'm particularly fond of how NGOs are so good at monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We have seen a lot of randomized control trials in different aspects of education and measuring improved learning outcomes, measuring like teacher engagement, measuring, for instance, girls' retention. We've read a number of good reports, and I think it would be really good to also have NGOs participate in monitoring evaluation of different programs in e-learning, and to be able to actually collect data and maybe monitor and collect data of what is actually working and what can actually be replicated and what can be scaled nationwide or perhaps regionally, maybe globally. But then NGOs can have a role in assisting in that evaluation of data, but also to be able to inform us with scientific evidence of what is actually working in the digital education space and what is perhaps not necessarily giving us the best of outcomes. This is a core strength of NGOs, and I feel something which can really assist in building up the digital education ecosystem. If we have data that we can all rely on and use it to inform strategic and action plans of the future in digital education. And then, of course, the other thing which NGOs can really do is participate in capacity building. And now this could be infrastructure in terms of providing devices, but also in terms of like supporting schools development and schools, computer labs, for instance, or schools buildings, depending on the needs. But again, this is something which NGOs have done very well in the past, but it's more if they can actually target around digital education, but also skills development. There's an issue with teachers' professional development. We find in some cases a teacher may have been trained maybe 20 years ago, and there's a need for refresher courses. There's a need to provide with them with the right skills for the current students of the 21st century. And this could actually be skills around ICT for education, but it could also be just new pedagogies and new methodologies of teaching students. And I think there's quite a big gap here in terms of teachers training. And again, my advice would be, of course, not to go into school and then get into training students, because I personally believe that takes away the teacher's autonomy. But I really think we can do so much in building capacities of teachers in schools by assisting them with the right trainings and the right support ongoing after the training. There are a lot of community-based organizations that are doing this in other areas of education. We've seen a lot of environmental programs or life skills, adolescents, reproductive health, or even HIV prevention. And I think like NGOs can also play a role in actually digital education. And then, of course, there's also, which is again a strong aspect of NGOs around advocacy and policy engagement. We've seen them being very strong on advocating for different policies, advocating for different rights, advocating for different new pedagogies or new methodologies or even new approaches in just social development. And I think this is quite an area which they can also assist in just pushing for the digital education agenda in Tanzania, but also again regionally. So it's I think as I had said earlier, there are a number of players, and I think it's just knowing the core strength of each player or each stakeholder and how best they can work with other members of the ecosystem to bring the results which we all desire of having improved learning outcomes. Yeah, so back to Shule Direct. So I'm happy to introduce to you Teacher Kidevu, who is Tanzania's first virtual teacher. So Teacher Kidevu, you'll find him on all of our platforms on web, mobile, and also on SMS. We are inspired by Teacher Kidevu because he is a qualified teacher and he knows and understands his students. He's also a teacher who is versatile and knowledgeable in all the subjects in the secondary school curriculum. And our ambition is to replicate Teacher Kidevu to every student. So using artificial intelligence, we have made Teacher Kidevu available to every student in Tanzania through our platforms. So on our web and on our web platform, in combination, we have a website which is available at shuledirect.co.tz, and it's also available as an app. Just search Shule Direct on Google Play Store or iOS. And over time, we've really grown in the number of users. So we've had 2.2 million unique users. We've had over 240,000 registered students. And currently we have about 180,000 active app downloads. And over 90 schools in Tanzania are connected to our learning management system. So our web is available online. Our application is also available online on all app stores. And we have a learning management system which is for schools. So what you see in the image is a learning management system which is available for students in Tanzania secondary school. It's offline and they're able to access everything that is available online, but it's coupled with a teacher's dashboard, a student's dashboard, and an admin dashboard connected over a local area network, enabling them to not just consume our content, but also to create their own content within the school and share. So again, it's not just creating access to content, but we are also building digital skills practically. Instead of like telling them, go on Microsoft Word and learn how to do Microsoft Word, they can actually practically learn how to actually do Microsoft Word through writing an assignment, for instance. And then of course, we're happy to introduce Makini SMS. So this is an SMS platform. It's based on feature phones. So it's not a mandatory for you to have a smartphone to access our platforms. It's currently available for free through our partnership with UNICEF. And it's a short messaging service, and you're able to do multiple quizzes. These quizzes were developed in partnership with Human Development Innovation Fund, and we're able to provide content to 13 subjects of the secondary school curriculum, and they get quizzes over those secondary school subjects, but also they access lessons. And what is also so interesting out of COVID-19 is the aspect of us including parents and caregivers, which wasn't something which we were looking at doing this year. But again, we really saw the role of how parents and caregivers can influence in just education and improved learning. And we're so proud of the parents who have registered so far. So this is quite a new feature for us. And with the parents and caregivers, we really look into building digital user communities, which I think, again, NGOs can have quite a strong role, especially community-based organizations, in assisting us in having communities of parents who are looking at education as a whole, not necessarily just digital education, but also supporting education through technology and digital education. We really hope that parents and caregivers will be at the forefront of learning, and something which I believe is a positive outcome of the COVID-19, because we really saw parents being engaged when schools closed, and we hope to go on post-COVID to have them engaged, to have them build that teacher-parent relationship, and having them support their students, not necessarily leaving that task and responsibility to teachers and schools. And again, as an organization and all of our platforms and products, they are built on the principles for digital development. We are champions of the principles for digital development. Everything that we have done, that we are doing, we always design with the user. We are always in consultation with the user to understand their needs, to understand their gaps, their challenges. And as we're building our prototypes, we'll constantly engage them for feedback and always iterate based on that feedback and ensure that our platforms are relevant and contextual to their needs. We also believe in building for sustainability. So we have integrated not just business models, but we've also integrated exit models for us to ensure that our platforms, our solutions are part of the community in 100 years. So we really believe in digital education as a whole and not necessarily just as a one team ambition. We really want to have digital education as a systemic issue for education. We also reuse and improve, for instance, we did not create the secondary school curriculum or the primary school curriculum. We used what was already available from the Tanzania Institute of Education, and we just improved it to be able to provide access to it on our digital platforms. And of course, again, we believe in understanding the existing ecosystem so that we can know how best we can position ourselves and how best we can support each other, being able to contribute, but being also able to collaborate with other players in the ecosystem and build for sustainability, but also ensure we meet the common goal. We are also very data driven, and we believe, again, NGOs here have a great role to play. We also believe in building for scale, because again, we're using technology. So it allows you to build for 10 million people and not just for 100 people. And as I said before, when we look at Teacher Kidevu as a teacher, if it wasn't for Teacher Kidevu, for instance, we'd have to have maybe 100 teachers responding to students online. But with technology, we're able to use his artificial intelligence and allow him to respond to even 1 million students or 100,000 students at the same time online. So for us, scale is a big factor, and we think technology supports us to reach as many people as we can through our platforms. And of course, we use open standards because we also believe in supporting the common goods. So using aspects like Creative Commons and ensuring that we are building also for other technical developers and enabling them to come in and also use our platforms to support their role in digital education. And of course, we believe in collaboration and having all the players participate in the digital education agenda. Great, so that is all from me. Our goal is really to improve learning outcomes, and I would like to invite you all to be a catalyst to ensure student success by providing anytime and anywhere learning opportunities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Faraja. It was a very, very good presentation. I just wanted this presentation to just continue and continue. You could continue to listen, but yeah, thank you very much. And I have only a quick questions for you. I think part of them maybe you have already answered, but I'm just looking at this, the same question I asked from Jessina. I think you might be maybe in a better position to answer with more details on this inclusivity. So yeah, inclusivity. So when you're working with NGOs and targeting the education, but how do you ensure inclusivity in education in Tanzania where all citizens are included? Again, focusing on the ones that are not connected and those who cannot afford a mobile phone or smartphone or mobile phone. But is there anything you are working on at the moment or any plans to reach everyone in the future, not only for Shule Direct, but maybe in general, the whole ed tech in Tanzania?
so important to really factor in inclusion and not leaving any student behind. And for us, we've been quite engaged in an initiative called Regional Education Learning Initiative. And through that, there's a number of organizations in Tanzania who are working, these are NGOs, who are working directly on inclusion. And again, we are not experts, we're not inclusion experts, but what we really hope is that we can develop, in collaboration with different NGOs, we can develop our platforms to be able to accommodate different learning needs of students. We've been trying to really customize our platform to be able to support different learning needs. It's quite a process because we're also learning as we're doing it. But I think with the right partners who are experts in inclusion, we'll be able to really customize our learning experiences online to be able to suit different learning needs. But again, to be able to have what I said earlier, the digital user communities, having CBOs and NGOs on the ground, through our partnerships, we can actually support people and communities directly in communities. There's something which is so interesting during COVID-19, during that, when schools closed during the nightmare, it's with Friends of Haki Elimu, and they have a large network of parents in communities, and through them we are able to send digital resources to the parents who have smartphones, and these parents will have these groups of other, like groups of parents. We can even assist them with how best to support their students. So we think with the right partners who are integrated and they have the experience in communities, we will be able to reach the last mile student, but we'll also be able to accommodate different aspects of learning needs on our platforms online.
Thank you very much. And one other question for you. It's about these NGOs, the role of NGOs. So what do you think could be done to strengthen the role of civil society in the Tanzanian innovation ecosystem, especially when it comes to digital education?
So I think the first thing is, my call for NGOs, of course, is not to work in silos. I think they should open up and be willing to work with other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And I also think NGOs should be willing to experiment and to be able to be willing to take what I call calculated risk. And I think innovation is not a forte for technology practitioners. Innovation is a lifestyle, as what I would say. And I think NGOs can also adopt innovative mindsets and to also adopt innovative practices, and it's not necessarily, when you look at innovation and digital education, it's just complementing each other. So NGOs can really do what they do best, and in collaboration with other players in the ecosystem, to also get into the innovation and technology space with what they should start with what they do best. And as I said earlier, there's a need for data, there's a need for research, there's a need for analysis. We see a lot of EdTech programs, but we don't see a lot of analysis, whether they are working, whether they are actually leading us to improve learning outcomes. And NGOs can really have a role. And I believe once they've understood, once they have data, once they have the evidence, they can actually be great advocates of digital education.
Yes, thanks a lot, Faraja, for the presentation and for these answering my quick questions. And now we will jump to the Q&A. We have a few minutes there for this, and I have just a few questions. The first question actually goes to Jessina.
Okay.
But in case the details are like, if you might need maybe support from Faraja, then that is also fine. So someone was asking here, how is the mobile phone rate related to the ages? Is the mobile phone rate to persons above 18 years?
Okay, well, in the report, I wrote about the number of subscriptions there are. So according to the source, so there's 78 subscriptions per 100 inhabitants. So that's about 78%. And well, as it wasn't in the scope of the report, I would be uncomfortable providing a very detailed information about this. So I think Vraja maybe has information about the subscription if it's over 18 years old or younger.
Yes, if Faraja, could you help with that maybe? If you have anything to add to that one?
So I just didn't get the question though. Like,
okay. So it was, yeah, it wasn't that clear, but maybe, yeah, it was just written like, how is the mobile phone rate related to the ages? Is the mobile phone rate to persons above 18 years? I didn't get the questions right, but do you have anything to say about this age versus?
I don't think we have that data because now with the current registrations, it's that we're using the national, like the national IDs, which again requires you, like based on the national IDs, but then we don't have the right strata of data based on ages, knowing whether the current numbers includes children and adults, but of course the majority will be adults because they're the ones who will be paying for the phones.
All right, thank you. And then for that was the only one for Jessina. So then to Faraja, somebody was asking who is producing formal education learning content for digital platforms? And then she actually added like turning school syllabus to be accessed online is a challenging task. And she was wondering if authorities are coordinating this.
Yes, authorities are fully coordinating. So when you consider online content, it's the same way you should consider, in terms of the development process, it's the same way you should consider textbook materials. So you have different publishers publishing different textbooks, and they would create the content for a textbook, take it to Tanzania Institute of Education under the Ministry of Education. It will be reviewed, sent maybe back for revisions, then finally approved and put out into the market ready for public consumption. It's the same process for online content in the sense that it still has to be reviewed and approved by the Ministry of Education in Tanzania for it to be able to be consumed in public. The difference is, and again with any sort of supplementary sources, there's so many out there that are existing online that are not necessarily reviewed or approved. And but the moment you want to integrate your solution or your platform in a school directly, it means you have to have the approval process done.
All right. Thank you, and I will continue here. I have more questions for you, Faraja. 1 minute, please. I'll just have to check here and read it. Yes, so somebody was saying here, like technology is still a serious bottleneck towards inclusive and effective digital learning in our country. Like I think the person is from Tanzania. How do we go about this?
Yes, it is a bottleneck, but if I tell you how much of a bottleneck it was when we were starting SureDirect, 2013, 2014, you wouldn't believe it. So in my opinion, I really think there's been significant growth, and I'm quite optimistic of the future. And I really think there are a number of factors which can assist in technology to not be an issue. So right now, for instance, as a country, there's the national fiber going on, but then there's also like globally, the prices of mobile phones and smartphones are becoming quite affordable. And the competition between the global players also means that down in the market, the prices are very affordable. So I really think there's a number of factors when it comes to technology. So there's an issue of access to technology itself, like some places are not connected, and we hope with telecoms, again, competition is good. Telecoms are trying to reach as many areas as possible. So as they're trying to reach more areas, it means more areas are going to be connected. and more areas, that connectivity, then people will be motivated to actually get into trying to buy a smartphone. And then if they get the then the students will be interested in using that device. And again, with constant use, then they'll be able to adopt the digital skills and again, digital behaviors and become fully integrated digital citizens with different platforms out there.
Yes, thank you. And the next question again to you, Faraja, is somebody wrote here, like teachers are often struggling to integrate digital tools and materials to their pedagogy, not only in Tanzania, but all over the world. For example, in Finland, teachers have added a lot of training to be able to utilize digital platforms effectively. So capacity building, further training, support, and maintenance are in crucial role. How has Schule Direct experienced and managed this in their work?
So as I said earlier, what is so important is not trying to imitate the classroom experience and take it online. That doesn't work. Like I think with most teachers, at least the ones I've met, what they usually try to do is to kind of try to mimic the classroom experience. And again, with digital education or online platforms, is really thinking afresh, thinking, what do I want my students to achieve here? So, and sometimes it's not necessarily, perhaps you want them to learn independent of the teacher, but then you want to facilitate that process. And that takes a very different turn as a teacher and the pedagogy. So I think the first issue with most teachers is changing that mindset that who am I as a teacher? And really being comfortable with the fact that the world is a very fast-paced place right now, and the teacher's role is changing very fast. So instead of a teacher really focusing on giving the entire responsibility of learning on their shoulders and being that sole dispenser of knowledge, they can look at their role as, how do I use these tools to ensure that there's collaboration, there's communication, there is interlinks between students, there is facilitation of learning, and not necessarily, and from everyone, like the entire classroom, and not necessarily having a teacher being the sole, like the sole person who knows everything. So I think that's the first aspect. But then the second aspect is comfortability. I think everything, once you know your learning objective as a teacher, and once you understand that you're there to facilitate, and of course, you know your student best, you know your learning objectives, you know your curriculum, then it's really looking at which tool will give you that, that success of that learning objective. And I think there are a number of tools, but again, ultimately, it's about experimenting and trying a tool that works for a particular classroom. And I think this is where also learning needs come into play. You really have to understand different needs of your students to be able to know what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, thank you for that. And then there is another question here that I didn't get it clearly, but then I think it's about Schule Direct, that there were some updates of a new version in 2008 that some of your users had to uninstall. But then after coming in, back then they had some of the content, you'll have to pay to access some content. Is it so, or maybe the person was experiencing a special challenge?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we design everything with our users. We were actually trying out a business model at the time, and we were trying to have a paid version of the app. And fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know who it is. Let me just try to find the person. He was one of the ones. We thought you have money, so he
sighed.
He was one of the lucky ones who got the paid version. But of course, again, as I said, we design with the users. So a lot of people like him dropped out. And because of that reason, we changed that aspect of the business model. So now it's free. So you shouldn't, you can just download the app now, please do. And it's for free.
All right, yes. And then another question is all production national, or are there foreign partners? I am asking this with the point of view of education export and Finnish companies. Hello. I think we lost Faraja.
I think this was for Faraja, right?
Yes, it was for Faraja. I think we lost her there. I hope she can join soon before we close. We have one more question after this. So let's hope that she can connect back soon. Yeah. Hi, Faraja.
Yes.
Yes, we lost you. Yes, so the question was, you got the question?
No, I didn't. Yeah,
okay,
I just lost you after I responded.
All right. The question was that, is all production national or are there foreign partners? I'm asking this with the point of view of education exports and Finnish companies.
Okay, so we've only tried to engage, specifically, we've been engaging a multimedia company outside Tanzania at the moment. And we also look at engaging a gaming company outside Tanzania. But all our content is based on the national curriculum. It's local content. But what we've really learned in the last 1 year is just enhancing the user experience. And we are really keen on getting into gamification and getting into more multimedia use of the content. So for that reason, we're not experts in that. We're building our own in-house expertise, but we've been partnering with companies that are working that area. And of course, I know, I love Angry Birds from Finland. And if there's any other company that is interested, or organization and experts in animation or multimedia, we'll be more than happy to partner with you.
Yes, thank you. That was good to hear. And of course, Faraja has very good relations with Finland. She has been here for Slash.
Yes.
She didn't mention that part.
Yes, I actually forgot. Yes, it's really nice. So back when we were just starting in 2014, as part of the Tanz ICT program, they did a business competition. We're one of the winners. And so one of the prizes was to go to Slash and represent your business idea. Yeah, Slash was mind-blowing for me, but I really, really enjoyed it. I learned quite a lot. I'm not so sure if I really appreciated the weather, but apart from that, I loved everything else.
Yes, good. And then another question, then I think this is almost the final one, goes to Faraja, is as much as we advocate for more students and young people to use internet for learning purposes, how can we control access to other inappropriate information that be available to the students on the internet as well?
I love this question because I get asked this question so many times. And this is what I believe in. So I think for me, and I have 2 children. My daughter is turning 12 in 2 months, and my son is turning 11. So I speak of this from a parent's perspective, but also from an advocate for children's rights, and also from, again, an entrepreneur. So this is what I really believe. I believe that it's so important to have a strong values system, building ethics and values. And with a strong value system, we are creating a foundation where these children become resilient and citizens of integrity when they grow up and as they're growing up. And I really think we cannot, it's the same thing with the television. When you give a child, you still have to be there, you still have to put in parental controls. So it's the same thing with online. I think, okay.
There was some
lost you again.
Yes.
But I think, yes, I think it's so important to have a strong value system in our families and in the schools, but also in the communities. And we cannot delegate our role as parents, as teachers, as community members in safe and good, strong upbringing for our children. And it's so important to really know that if a child doesn't have values, they'll just grow up without values and they'll really succumb to all these pressures. And we should also understand our role is to protect them. So having all these safeguards in place and not just giving a platform to a child and letting them be. Not just giving access to a phone to a child and just letting them be, or not just giving, let's say, data bundles and letting them be. It's so important for us to really understand that we still have a role. We still have to be there. We still have to support them in their growth, in their well-being, and have all the right controls and checks in place. It's the same way we have parental controls on television. That's how we should also have parental controls online.
Thank you,
by
Farah.
actively supervising and being there.
Yes, thank you very much, Faraja and Jessina. Thank you so much for the presentations. And these were the questions. And we are now done. Maybe before closing here, like in a few minutes, we will close in 2-3 minutes. If everyone can just open their videos and we see who is there. And please, very good to see all of you. And please, the report is in our website, and I think the link will be shared in the chat. Yes, it's there. You can access the landscape report. The chat is there, and Jessina and Faraja's contacts, I think, in the chat. If they haven't been put yet, then they will just put them like their emails. In case you need to communicate with them, then feel free. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending to this event. It was very good to have you.
Thank you for attending the event on my behalf as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.